The first patrol car arrived before the morning fog had even cleared from the valley, and that was a problem because the second patrol car arrived 30 seconds later. A line of SUVs stretched down Bellamy Trace Road as far as I could see. Delivery vans sat idling beside luxury crossovers. Retired homeowners stood outside holding coffee cups while staring at the barricades I had placed across the road at sunrise. Nobody looked happy. Good. A woman in a white blazer stormed across the gravel shoulder toward me like she owned the place. Her expensive shoes were already collecting dust. Her jaw was tight. Her phone was pressed against her ear. She pointed directly at me before she even reached the barricade. "That is him," she shouted. "That is the man blocking our road." Our road. Those two words told me everything. I stood beside the gate with my hands in my pockets while the morning wind moved through the dogwood trees lining both sides of the road. The barricades were bright orange. The legal notice was attached right in the middle where everyone could see it. The county survey markers were visible 50 feet away. Nothing about what I was doing was hidden. Nothing. The woman finally stopped in front of me. Claudette Mercer, president of the Pine Hollow Reserve HOA, self-appointed ruler of 86 households and apparently an expert on property she did not own. "Move the barricades," she said. "No." She blinked. The people standing behind her looked surprised. She probably was too. Most people expect a long argument. Most people expect shouting. Most people expect explanations. I gave her one word. That was enough. "You cannot do this," she snapped. "Watch me." The crowd got quieter. One deputy stepped out of his patrol car, while another began speaking with residents near the front of the traffic line. Claudette immediately switched into performance mode. Her voice became louder. Her posture became straighter. She wanted an audience. "Officer, this man is blocking the only road serving our neighborhood." I noticed she never called it my road. Interesting. The deputy looked at me, then at the barricade, then at the legal notice attached to it. "Sir," he asked. I handed him a thick manila folder. Nothing else. Just the folder. The look on Claudette's face was worth getting up early for. She expected me to argue. She expected me to defend myself. Instead, I gave the deputy paperwork. Lots of it. Deeds. Surveys. County records. Maintenance agreements. Photographs. Copies. Certified copies. Because paperwork has a funny way of making loud people nervous. The deputy opened the folder while Claudette folded her arms. Around us, engines continued idling. People whispered. Somebody pulled out a phone and started recording. The fog was slowly lifting from the hills beyond the estate. The entire valley felt like it was holding its breath. Then Claudette made her biggest mistake. She pointed at the barricade and said, "Remove it." Not "please remove it." Not "can you remove it." Remove it. Like she was giving orders. The deputy looked at her for a second, then back at the documents, then back at the road. I saw the first crack appear in her confidence. Tiny, but real. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "before anyone moves anything, I need to understand who owns this road." That was when Claudette stopped talking for the first time all morning. Just stopped. Completely. I looked down Bellamy Trace Road toward the rows of vehicles waiting for someone else to solve their problem. Then I looked back at the deputy and smiled. "That," I said, "is exactly the right question." What happened next started months earlier, long before the patrol cars arrived, long before the barricades went up, and long before an entire HOA learned the difference between using a road and owning one. If you happen to live near a private road, or if you have ever wondered who really controls the roads leading into a neighborhood, you may recognize pieces of this story. The details change from county to county. Human nature usually does not. Let me back up. The road at the center of all that chaos was called Bellamy Trace, and most people who drove across it every day never stopped to think about who built it, who maintained it, or who paid for it. They saw smooth pavement winding through the trees. They saw a convenient shortcut connecting their neighborhood to the highway. They saw a road. I saw something very different. Bellamy Trace existed because my father had carved it out of the hills almost 60 years earlier when this entire valley was still farmland. He spent 2 summers clearing brush, hauling gravel, and laying drainage pipe with equipment that would look ancient today. My mother used to joke that he loved that road more than his pickup truck. She was probably wrong, but not by much. Years later, after I became a county road engineer, I helped improve parts of it myself. I knew every curve. I knew every culvert. I knew every drainage ditch and every patch that needed attention after a hard winter. That road was practically family. Then Evelyn came into my life. She loved Bellamy Trace for different reasons. Every spring, she planted dogwood trees along the shoulders. Every fall, she decorated the mailbox near the entrance with pumpkins and seasonal flowers. Every morning after retirement, we walked that road together before breakfast, talking about everything and nothing while the fog drifted through the valley. Those walks became our routine. Then they became our memories. After Evelyn passed away from a heart condition 4 years ago, Bellamy Trace became the one place where I still felt close to her. Some people visit cemeteries. I walked that road. Simple as that. The estate itself covered hundreds of acres across the foothills of North Carolina. Rolling fields, hardwood forests, a small fishing pond, a stone house overlooking the valley. On paper, it was worth about $7.5 million. To me, the number never mattered. The memories did. That was why I stayed after retirement. That was why I kept maintaining everything myself. That was why every spring I still trimmed the dogwoods Evelyn planted. Then the subdivision arrived. At first it looked harmless enough. Construction crews appeared on neighboring land behind my property. Trees came down. Survey flags appeared. Roads were graded. Within 2 years, a development called Pine Hollow Reserve began taking shape. Large homes, neat landscaping, retirees moving in from larger cities. Nice people for the most part. I had no problem with that. Growth happens. Communities change. Life moves forward. The first sign of trouble came when I noticed unfamiliar vehicles using Bellamy Trace. At first it was 1 or 2 cars a week. Then it became several every day. Delivery vans started showing up. Contractors began using the road. Moving trucks rolled past my gate. One afternoon I stopped a driver and asked where he was headed. He pointed toward Pine Hollow Reserve. "This is the neighborhood entrance road, right?" he asked. That caught my attention. "No," I said. "It is not." He looked genuinely confused. I believed him. A week later another driver said the same thing. Then another. Then another. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Somebody was telling people Bellamy Trace belonged to the subdivision. Somebody was presenting private property as community infrastructure. At first I thought it was an honest misunderstanding. Then I met Claudette Mercer. And that was when I realized the problem was not confusion. The problem was confidence. The dangerous kind. The kind that grows when someone repeats something long enough that other people stop asking questions. The first time Claudette Mercer came to my front gate, she arrived in a white Lexus SUV that looked cleaner than any vehicle had a right to be after driving through a North Carolina valley. The afternoon sun reflected off the paint. The tires rolled slowly across the gravel. She stepped out carrying a leather folder and the kind of smile that usually means somebody wants something. I was repairing a section of fence near the entrance when she approached. "Mr. Bellamy?" she asked. "That is me." "Wonderful. I am Claudette Mercer, president of the Pine Hollow Reserve Homeowners Association." She extended her hand. I shook it. Her grip was firm. Her smile never moved. "Beautiful property," she said while looking past me toward the hills. "Thank you. The residents love driving through here." That sentence landed harder than she realized. Not because it was rude, because it assumed something. I set my tools down and waited. Sure enough, she got to the point less than a minute later. I wanted to discuss access. There it was. Simple, direct, predictable. She opened the folder and pulled out several maps. One showed the subdivision. Another showed surrounding parcels. A third showed Bellamy Trace highlighted in bright blue. My road. Not hers. Mine. "Many residents are already using this route," she said. "It is convenient, safe, and it helps traffic flow." I looked at the map, then at her. "It is also private." Her smile tightened slightly. Just slightly. Of course. But communities work best when neighbors cooperate. I had heard that line before. Different words. Same meaning. Somebody wants your property without paying for it. "What exactly are you asking for?" I said. "We would like permanent access." There was no hesitation. No uncertainty. She had clearly rehearsed this conversation. "No." Her eyes blinked once. "Perhaps you would like to hear the full proposal." "No." "We are willing to discuss maintenance participation." Still no. The smile faded another inch. The wind moved through the dogwood trees lining the road, while a truck rumbled somewhere in the distance. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then Claudette changed tactics. "Mr. Bellamy, this would benefit everyone. Everyone except the owner." That landed. I could see it. She closed the folder a little harder than necessary. You know, roads are meant to connect people. Private roads connect owners to their property. Her jaw tightened. Mine did not. That seemed to bother her more than the answer itself. Before leaving, she glanced down Bellamy Trace again. I think eventually you will see this differently. I do not. She drove away without another word. I thought that would be the end of it. It was not. Over the next several weeks, traffic increased. Contractors started using the road regularly. Delivery vans appeared almost every day. Landscaping trucks rolled through before sunrise. Some drivers waved. Some looked confused. Most assumed they belonged there. One afternoon, I counted 37 vehicles that had nothing to do with my estate. 37. Then I started noticing something else. Residents spoke about Bellamy Trace as if it were already part of Pine Hollow Reserve. They did not ask permission. They did not wonder who owned it. They simply accepted what they had been told. That was when I understood the real strategy. Claudette was not trying to win an argument. She was trying to create a new reality. If enough people used the road long enough, they would stop questioning whether they had a right to use it at all. And if nobody questioned it, eventually they would believe it belonged to them. That was her first mistake. I spent 40 years working around property records, road classifications, easements, and right-of-way disputes. I knew something she did not. Repetition can create assumptions. It cannot create ownership. The first official sign went up on a Tuesday morning. I installed it myself beside the entrance to Bellamy Trace using pressure-treated posts and enough concrete to keep it standing through any mountain storm North Carolina could throw at it. The sign was simple. Private road. No HOA access. It was impossible to miss. That was the point. By lunchtime, 3 residents had already stopped to ask questions. By sunset, the sign had somehow become the most controversial object in the entire valley. Funny how that works. Most of the residents who approached me were polite. Some were confused. A few looked embarrassed. Nearly all of them told the same story. They believed Bellamy Trace was part of the neighborhood access system. They believed the HOA had permission. They believed somebody else had already handled the legal details. Nobody had. One retired couple stopped near my mailbox while walking their dog. We thought the community maintained this road, the husband said. No, I replied. I do. His wife looked genuinely surprised. All of it. Every foot. They thanked me for explaining and continued on their way. Not everyone was that reasonable. 2 days later, I came home from town and nearly drove into a brand new sign installed 20 yards beyond mine. It stood right beside the shoulder near the subdivision entrance. Large green letters stretched across the front. Pine Hollow Reserve Resident Route. I actually laughed when I saw it. Not because it was funny, because it was bold. Somebody had taken the time to order the sign, deliver it, install it, and place it on property they did not own. That requires a special kind of confidence. I took several photographs before doing anything else. Then I drove straight to the HOA office. Claudette was standing in the lobby speaking with 2 board members when I walked in. The room became very quiet the moment they saw the signed photographs in my hand. We need to talk, I said. Claudette smiled. The same smile. The one that never quite reached her eyes. About what? The sign on my property. It helps residents navigate the neighborhood. It is on my land. She folded her arms. The road serves the community. The road belongs to me. One board member suddenly found something fascinating on the floor. Another stared at a wall calendar. Nobody wanted to join the conversation. Claudette stepped forward. You are creating unnecessary conflict. No, I am identifying ownership. That landed harder than she expected. Her expression tightened for just a second before the smile returned. We are simply helping residents understand access. Access to what? I asked. She did not answer immediately. That told me everything. The following week, traffic increased again. Landscaping trailers rattled across the shoulders. Contractors used the road as a shortcut. Delivery vans arrived before sunrise. One truck clipped a section of drainage culvert near a creek crossing and cracked the concrete edge. I stood there looking at the damage while the driver apologized. He honestly believed he was on a community road. I believed him. That was the problem. The misinformation had traveled farther than the truth. Eventually, I contacted the sheriff's non-emergency line and requested documentation of the situation. Deputy Alan Reeves arrived later that afternoon. He was professional, calm, and clearly familiar with property disputes. After reviewing my deed copies and road records, he nodded. Looks pretty straightforward. That is what I thought. He looked down the road toward Pine Hollow Reserve. The challenge is getting everybody else to understand that. Wise man. Before leaving, he completed a report and encouraged both sides to remain civil. I agreed. Claudette apparently interpreted that differently, because less than a week later, a community newsletter appeared online describing Bellamy Trace as an important access corridor for residents. Not a private estate road, not private property, an access corridor. The language was changing. The assumptions were growing. And somewhere behind all those carefully chosen words, somebody was trying very hard to turn convenience into entitlement. Over the next month, the situation stopped being about a road and started becoming about an entire community that had built its daily routine around something it did not actually own. Every morning, I watched a steady stream of vehicles move across Bellamy Trace. Retirees headed toward town. Contractors drove toward job sites. Grocery delivery vans rolled through before lunch. Home service companies treated the road like public infrastructure. Nobody seemed to question it anymore. That was the dangerous part. Assumptions have a way of becoming habits. One morning, I was checking a drainage ditch near the lower curve of the road when an older man pulled over beside me in a silver pickup truck. He introduced himself as Harold Briggs. I recognized the name from Pine Hollow Reserve. He seemed friendly enough. "Mr. Bellamy?" he asked. "That is me." He nodded toward the road. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you really own all of this?" I looked around. The trees, the shoulders, the pavement, the creek crossing. "Yes." He stared at me for a few seconds. Then he frowned. "That is not what we were told." There it was again. The same sentence. Different person. Same story. Harold explained that several homeowners had been told Bellamy Trace was part of the access system connected to the subdivision. Some believed the HOA maintained it. Others believed there was a permanent agreement with the property owner. A few thought the county owned it. Nobody seemed to know for sure. Yet everyone acted like they did. I spent nearly 20 minutes talking with him. By the time he left, he looked more concerned than angry. That told me something important. Many residents were not trying to take advantage of anyone. They simply trusted the information they had been given. The problem was bigger than one road. The problem was misinformation. A week later, I learned just how far that misinformation had spread. While picking up supplies in town, I ran into a local contractor I had known for years. We talked for a few minutes before he asked a strange question. "How is the HOA maintenance project going?" I stared at him. "What HOA maintenance project?" He looked confused. "The one for the neighborhood access road." My stomach sank. "There is no HOA maintenance project." He blinked twice. "Really? Really?" He shook his head slowly. "Then somebody is telling people a very different story." Exactly. Later that afternoon, I began reviewing public HOA communications more closely. Newsletters, meeting summaries, community announcements, social media updates. The language was subtle, but the pattern was obvious once I saw it. References to road improvements appeared more frequently. Mentions of neighborhood access became more confident. Descriptions of community infrastructure started showing up where they never had before. The wording never directly claimed ownership. It did not need to. The implication did all the work. Then I found something that truly got my attention. Buried inside a community budget summary was a line item called Road Access Assessment. I read it twice. Then a third time. The HOA was collecting monthly fees connected to access improvements. Access improvements tied to a road they did not own. That changed everything. Suddenly, this was no longer just about convenience. Money had entered the picture. Real money. Enough money that people might start asking uncomfortable questions if the truth ever came out. A few days later, I attended a public community meeting held at the clubhouse. I sat quietly in the back row and listened. Claudette stood at the front of the room, speaking confidently about future projects, property values, and neighborhood planning. Residents nodded along. Everything sounded polished. Everything sounded professional. Then she displayed a large map showing the community transportation layout. There it was. Bellamy Trace. Highlighted. Integrated. Presented as if it were simply part of the neighborhood. Nobody questioned it. Nobody raised a hand. Nobody asked about ownership. They trusted the presentation because it looked official. I sat there watching and realized something. Claudette was no longer asking for access. She had moved beyond that stage months ago. In her mind, Bellamy Trace already belonged to the HOA. The paperwork simply had not received the message yet. When the meeting ended, Several residents gathered around the display board. I heard one man tell his wife, "At least we have 2 routes in and out of the community." I looked at the map one last time before leaving. Because according to every deed, survey, county record, maintenance invoice, and property file I possessed, they did not have 2 routes. They had 1. And sooner or later, reality was going to catch up with the story they had been told. After that community meeting, I stopped treating the situation like a disagreement and started treating it like an engineering problem. Engineering has a simple rule. If something does not make sense, follow the data. Feelings matter. Opinions matter. But records matter more. The next Monday morning, I drove to the county records office carrying a legal pad, 3 folders, and enough coffee to keep a small construction crew awake. The building looked exactly the way county buildings always look. Functional, quiet, slightly outdated. Perfect. A clerk named Denise had worked there for years. We knew each other from my time as a county road engineer. When she saw me walk in, she smiled. "Let me guess," she said. "Road problem. That obvious? You are carrying the road folders." Fair point. Over the next several hours, we pulled every document connected to Bellamy Trace. Original deeds, historical plats, property surveys, maintenance records, right-of-way maps, county road inventories. Everything. Piece by piece, the paper trail stretched back decades. Every document told the same story. The road belonged to the Bellamy property. The county never accepted it as a public road. No public dedication existed. No transfer existed. No recorded easement benefiting Pine Hollow Reserve existed. Nothing. The paperwork was crystal clear. Then, Denise found something interesting. Very interesting. She slid a subdivision plat across the counter and tapped a section near the bottom. "Look here." I leaned closer. Pine Hollow Reserve had originally planned a second access road connecting directly to a state-maintained route on the eastern side of the development. The proposed road appeared on early planning documents. Then it disappeared from later versions. "What happened?" I asked. Denise shrugged. "Looks like the plan changed." That answer stayed with me all afternoon. Because if Pine Hollow Reserve once planned its own access road, somebody knew Bellamy Trace was not supposed to be part of the development. Somebody knew from the beginning. That evening I called a real estate attorney named Martha Kincaid. Martha specialized in easement disputes, property access issues, and land use conflicts. In other words, exactly the kind of mess sitting in my lap. 2 days later we met in her office overlooking downtown Asheville. She reviewed every document carefully. She asked questions. She took notes. She barely spoke for nearly an hour. Then she closed the final folder. "Well?" I asked. Martha leaned back in her chair. "The good news is your documents are excellent. And the bad news? You are dealing with people who appear to have convinced themselves that convenience equals entitlement." That sounded accurate. She pointed toward the subdivision plat Denise had found. "This is important." I thought so too. Martha nodded. Somebody designed this development with independent access in mind. Then somewhere along the way they started relying on your road instead. We spent the next several weeks gathering more information. Martha requested additional filings. I obtained maintenance invoices going back years. We documented drainage repairs, resurfacing costs, culvert replacements, tree removal expenses, and snow treatment records. Every bill had one thing in common. I paid it. Not the HOA. Not the county. Me. Then another piece of the puzzle appeared. A resident from Pine Hollow Reserve anonymously mailed a packet to Martha's office. No name. No return address. Just documents. Inside were HOA meeting summaries, budget discussions, and planning notes. Most were ordinary. One was not. Buried in the middle of a budget report sat a line item labeled Access Corridor Assessment. I read it twice, then 3 times. Residents were paying a monthly fee connected to road access planning. Road access planning tied to Bellamy Trace. My road. Martha looked up from the report. Now we know why nobody wants to discuss ownership. Because money is involved. Exactly. The situation suddenly made much more sense. If residents had been paying fees based on assumptions about access, admitting the truth could create a lot of uncomfortable questions. Questions about budgets. Questions about representations. Questions about decisions. Questions nobody wanted to answer. Martha closed the file and folded her hands. "Do not block the road yet." I looked at her. "You think I should wait?" "I think you should prepare." Big difference. She explained that property disputes are often won long before any confrontation happens. Documentation, notice, records, process, those things matter. Emotion does not. Over the next month, we prepared carefully. Every photograph was organized. Every record was copied. Every survey was certified. Every communication was preserved. By the time we finished, I had enough documentation to fill an entire shelf in my office. Then Martha drafted one final notice. A formal letter explaining ownership, road status, and the absence of any recorded access rights benefiting the HOA. It gave them time to respond, time to adjust, time to fix the problem before reality arrived. What happened next told me they never intended to fix anything at all. The response to Martha's letter arrived faster than either of us expected. That alone told me somebody was nervous. The envelope came from the HOA attorney and contained 6 pages of carefully written language that managed to say very little while sounding very official. The letter never challenged my ownership. It never produced an easement. It never cited a recorded access agreement. Instead, it talked about community reliance, historical use, safety concerns, and neighborhood expectations. Interesting choice. They were arguing feelings because they did not have facts. Martha read the letter twice before setting it aside. Well, I asked. She smiled. They did not give us what we needed, which is any evidence that they actually have a right to use your road. That was good news. It was also confirmation that the situation was moving exactly where she expected. Over the next 2 weeks, we continued documenting everything. Cameras recorded traffic patterns. Survey markers were checked and photographed. Maintenance records were updated. Every vehicle entering Bellamy Trace was logged. Every new communication was preserved. The more information we gathered, the clearer the picture became. Pine Hollow Reserve was functioning as though Bellamy Trace belonged to them. The paperwork still disagreed. One afternoon, Harold Briggs stopped by again. He looked uncomfortable. We sat on the porch overlooking the valley while a light breeze moved through the trees. After a few minutes, he finally spoke. People are starting to ask questions. About the road? I asked. He nodded. About the fees, too. That got my attention. Harold explained that several residents had begun reviewing HOA budgets after hearing rumors about the ownership dispute. Some wanted to know why they were paying assessments connected to access planning. Others wanted to know whether the board had actually verified the road status before collecting money. The answers were not going well. Claudette says everything is under control, Harold said. Does she? He gave me a look that said he was no longer sure. Neither was anyone else. A few days later, another anonymous packet appeared. This one contained internal meeting notes. Most of the pages were routine. Then I found a sentence that nearly made me laugh. A planning committee had described Bellamy Trace as the community's preferred long-term access solution. Preferred. Not legal. Not recorded. Preferred. Somebody had built an entire strategy around wishful thinking. That was a problem. Martha thought so too. This helps us, she said. Why? Because it shows awareness. She pointed to the document. They knew the road was important. They discussed it internally. Yet, they never secured legal rights. The mistake was getting bigger. Meanwhile, Claudette became more aggressive. Community newsletters continued referencing road access. Residents received updates discussing transportation planning. A social media post even referred to Bellamy Trace as an established neighborhood route. The wording remained careful, but the message was obvious. Repetition was still doing the heavy lifting. Then came the final push. Claudette sent me a certified letter claiming that closing the road could interfere with emergency access for residents. The language sounded serious. Very serious. Until Martha reviewed it. She immediately spotted the problem. Did they notify the fire marshal? She asked. Not that I know of. Did they notify county emergency management? No. She smiled. Then they are making assumptions again. The next morning, Martha contacted the appropriate offices herself. The responses were enlightening. County officials confirmed that emergency planning for Pine Hollow Reserve relied on the subdivision's recorded legal access route, not Bellamy Trace. Fire services had no record identifying my road as required community access. Dispatch records showed the same thing. One assumption after another began collapsing. By then, Martha believed we had reached the end of the investigation phase. It was time to act. She drafted a final notice and sent certified copies to the HOA attorney, county officials, the sheriff's office, and every appropriate agency. The notice clearly stated ownership, road status, survey confirmation, and the date on which unauthorized access would end. Nobody could claim surprise. Nobody could claim ignorance. Everybody received the same information. Then we waited. A week passed. Then another. No easement appeared. No agreement surfaced. No evidence arrived. Instead, traffic continued exactly as before. That silence told us everything. They were betting I would never follow through. They believed the inconvenience would force me to back down. They believed public pressure would scare me. They believed volume could replace documentation. They were wrong. On the evening before the deadline, I walked the entire length of Bellamy Trace alone. The sun was setting behind the mountains. Long shadows stretched across the pavement. The dogwood trees Evelyn planted years earlier stood quietly along the shoulders. I stopped near the entrance and looked toward Pine Hollow Reserve in the distance. Tomorrow morning, the assumptions ended. Tomorrow morning, the paperwork finally got its turn. The next morning arrived cold and quiet. A thin layer of fog rested across the valley floor while the first light of sunrise touched the tops of the trees. By 6:30, I was already standing at the entrance to Bellamy Trace with a thermos of coffee in one hand and a checklist in the other. Everything had been prepared exactly as Martha instructed. Temporary barricades were positioned safely across the road. Legal notices were attached in clear view. Survey markers had been photographed again. Cameras were recording. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was rushed. Everything was documented. That mattered. At 7 o'clock, the first vehicle arrived. Then another. Then 5 more. Within 15 minutes, a line of cars stretched down the road toward Pine Hollow Reserve. Drivers stepped outside. Some looked confused. Some looked annoyed. Most looked surprised. They had never considered the possibility that Bellamy Trace might actually close. Why would they? They had been told for months that it was part of their community. Then Claudette Mercer arrived. Right on schedule. Her white Lexus appeared around the bend and stopped hard near the front of the line. The driver's door opened immediately. She climbed out carrying her phone and a folder. Even from 50 feet away, I could see she was angry. Very angry. She marched directly toward the barricade. "What is this?" she demanded. I looked at the notices attached to the barrier. "Looks like a road closure. You cannot do this." "I already did." Her eyes narrowed. "Move it." "No." There was that word again. Simple. Effective. Claudette glanced behind her at the growing line of residents. An audience always made her more confident. "This road serves 86 households. This road serves my estate. You are creating a public safety issue." "No. I am enforcing private ownership." Her jaw tightened. Mine did not. Around us, more residents gathered near the barricade. Some whispered. Some stared. A few looked genuinely worried. Then Claudette pulled out her phone. "Fine," she said. "We will let law enforcement handle it." That was exactly what Martha and I expected. She dialed 911, standing right in front of me, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. She described a homeowner blocking what she called the community's only road. She described a dangerous situation. She described inconvenience. She described urgency. What she never described was ownership. That part kept getting left out. 20 minutes later, the first patrol unit arrived. Then a second. Deputy Alan Reeves stepped out of one vehicle. I recognized him immediately. The same deputy who had documented the dispute weeks earlier. Claudette rushed toward him before he even reached the barricade. She began talking the moment he opened the door. "Deputy, thank goodness you are here. He is blocking access to our neighborhood." Alan listened patiently. Then he looked toward me. "Morning, Mr. Bellamy." "Morning, Deputy." I handed him a folder. The same kind of folder that had frustrated Claudette months earlier. Inside were certified deeds, surveys, county records, maintenance files, notice letters, photographs, and the legal opinion Martha prepared. Alan accepted it without surprise. Then he started reading. The crowd became quiet. Really quiet. The kind of quiet that only happens when people suddenly realize something important is about to happen. Another deputy began speaking with dispatch. Claudette stood nearby with her arms folded. Confidence still covered her face. For the moment, several minutes passed. Alan reviewed documents. Dispatch checked records. The second deputy spoke into his radio. More waiting followed. Nobody moved. Nobody left. Then the radio crackled. The deputy listened carefully before nodding. He looked toward Alan. Alan looked toward me. Then both deputies looked toward Claudette. That was the moment the atmosphere changed. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just enough that everyone felt it. Alan closed the folder. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "county records confirm Bellamy Trace is privately owned property." Claudette immediately shook her head. "That cannot be right. The records are very clear. The residents use this road every day. Use does not establish ownership." The crowd became even quieter. Somewhere behind us, a car engine shut off. Somebody lowered a phone after recording for nearly 10 minutes. Claudette opened her folder and began pulling out HOA documents. Board resolutions, community newsletters, meeting notes, internal paperwork. Lots of paper. None of the right paper. Alan reviewed a few pages before handing them back. "Do you have a recorded easement?" he asked. Claudette stopped turning pages. For the first time all morning, she did not have an answer. The silence lasted only a few seconds. It felt much longer. Then dispatch delivered the final confirmation. No county dedication. No public road status. No recorded access rights benefiting Pine Hollow Reserve. No legal authority requiring Mr. Bellamy to keep the road open. None. The entire crowd heard it. Every assumption collapsed at once. Residents looked at each other. Some appeared shocked. Others appeared frustrated. A few simply looked exhausted. Claudette stood frozen beside the barricade while the reality she had been selling for months unraveled in front of 86 households. And at that moment, standing there beneath the dogwood trees Evelyn planted years earlier, the argument finally ended. The facts had arrived. The days following the road closure were surprisingly quiet. No patrol cars. No angry confrontations. No dramatic speeches. Just silence. The kind of silence that arrives after the truth finally catches up with the story. For the first time in months, Bellamy Trace felt like itself again. Every morning, I walked the road the same way Evelyn and I used to. The dogwood trees swayed gently in the mountain breeze. The gravel shoulders sat undisturbed. The valley seemed to exhale. Peace returned. Meanwhile, Pine Hollow Reserve was having a very different week. Residents wanted answers. Lots of them. The moment people learned the road was private property, they started asking questions about everything else they had been told. Questions about access. Questions about assessments. Questions about community planning. Questions about where their money had gone. Questions spread quickly, faster than rumors ever do. Harold Briggs called me about 2 weeks later. "You should see the HOA meeting," he said. "That bad." Worse. He was not exaggerating. Attendance broke every previous record. Residents filled the clubhouse meeting room. Others stood in hallways. Some watched online. People who had never attended a board meeting suddenly became very interested in governance. Funny how that works. According to Harold, the discussion lasted nearly 4 hours. Financial reports were reviewed. Planning documents were questioned. Old meeting notes resurfaced. Several residents demanded explanations regarding the access corridor assessment that had been collected for months. Nobody seemed satisfied with the answers. That mattered. Around the same time, Martha filed several legal actions related to trespass, property damage, and improper use of private infrastructure. Nothing dramatic. Nothing theatrical. Just documentation. Lots of documentation. Survey records. Maintenance invoices. Photographs. Communications. Years of evidence organized exactly the way courts like to see it. Paperwork was doing what paperwork does best. Several weeks later, another development occurred. Pine Hollow Reserve's board commissioned an independent review of community records and planning decisions. The findings created even more problems. Early development documents confirmed that the subdivision had originally been designed around a separate access solution. Internal discussions showed repeated awareness that Bellamy Trace was privately owned. Yet the community continued building expectations around a road it never legally controlled. Residents were not happy. Neither were attorneys. Eventually a vote was held. Claudette Mercer lost her position as HOA president. Not because someone shouted louder. Not because someone embarrassed her publicly. Because the documents no longer supported the story. Documentation beats intimidation. It always has. Over the following months, Pine Hollow Reserve began working with county officials to improve and expand its legitimate access route. The project cost money. It took time. It required planning. But it was legal. Most importantly, it belonged to them. Residents finally had the infrastructure they should have had from the beginning. As for Bellamy Trace, restoration became my focus. Settlement funds helped repair damaged shoulders. The cracked culvert near the creek crossing was replaced. Drainage improvements were completed. Several damaged dogwood trees were replanted. One by one, the scars disappeared. The road looked better than it had in years. One evening near the end of autumn, I stood beside the entrance watching the last light settle across the valley. The mountains were painted gold and orange. The air carried that familiar scent of leaves and pine. Everything felt steady again. The new sign near the entrance was simple. Private Estate Road. Access by written permission only. No arguments. No threats. Just facts. I smiled when I read it. Not because I had won something. Because the road had finally returned to what it had always been. Home. Before going inside, I stopped beside one of Evelyn's dogwood trees and looked down the long stretch of pavement disappearing through the hills. Then I thought about everything that had happened. Here is the lesson I took away from it. Property rights are not protected by anger. They are protected by records. Boundaries are not enforced by volume. They are enforced by documentation. And when somebody uses official-sounding words to convince you that ownership no longer matters, take the time to check the paperwork yourself. A confident voice can influence people. A recorded deed can change the outcome. I am not a lawyer, and every county handles road access issues differently. But if this story proves anything, it is that assumptions are fragile things. The truth does not need to shout. It only needs to be documented.